Thank you very much. My name again is Greg Bonnette. I'm a practice leader at Slalom Boston in data analytics. So work with our clients every day to help solve problems. And when I heard about the subject matter and the topic of the panel today, I was really excited to participate. I think really talking about how we collaborate together and work across, and how we embed data science in what we do, and how we drive outcomes for our customers and stakeholders in the business. I think that might be the hardest part about doing data science. So I'm really excited to have my friends here from Wayfair introduce themselves and share a little bit with us about how they do that at Wayfair. I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Perfect. Hey everyone, I'm Callie McGrath. I'm on our data science storefront and recommendations team, and I lead up recommendations, affinity scoring, and segmentation. Our team really focuses on how to predict what customers want so that we can help drive what we should recommend to them on our site.
So my name is Vinny DeGenova. I'm a senior manager on the data science team here at Wayfair, and my team is responsible for thinking about how can we leverage data around how customers are actually interacting with the Wayfair website, as well as attributes about the products in the catalog itself to kind of create this curated, personalized experience across a bunch of different touch points, ranging from the different search results pages or the grids on the website itself, different personalized carousels across the website, and then personalized product recommendations in marketing emails, as well as retargeting advertisements that are shown on other websites.
Great. And I'm Justin Pniower. I'm an associate director here in product management, and I run the recommendation strategies team. So the product engineering side of a lot of the recommendations we put across the touch points, the various touch points across Wayfair, the recommendations we show when you're browsing our storefront, or that you get in the various marketing channel emails that you get. We work very closely with both of these teams and data scientists up here, along with several others that are in the room as well watching us right now.
Awesome, thank you all. So I'm going to start with you, Justin. Help us understand how data science works at Wayfair. What's the operating model? How do you interact with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say it's actually evolving. I can say how we try to do it on recommendations. So there is no centralized reporting structure in any sort of way. Data science is its own function. But it is closely aligned with a true cross-functional team that cuts across both data science, engineering, product management, and analytics as well. And we do try and allocate a lot of those resources across those teams and align those with what we call single-threaded owners here, or STOs. One of which is the STO that we're all part of, which is customer intelligence and personalization. But again, it is a very collaborative, cross-functional team. I'd say it's very similar to what a lot of other product development teams do with product engineering and design, but extended to data science.
I think I would just add to that. Data science has its own centralized reporting and hiring, which allows us to kind of grow as an organization, to train people, to think about what kind of capabilities we want to develop on the whole. But then we embed each of our different data science teams with our partners in product and engineering and analytics so that we can actually drive forward and get things implemented.
Excellent. That's an excellent explanation. So, starting to kind of understand, talking with you beforehand and just hearing what you're talking about here, that the core of what you're doing is really powering recommendations and surfacing the right data at the right time for customers and the core experience. Help me understand a little bit more about the types of models you're building, the types of recommendations you're serving up. Yeah. Vinny, do you want to start with that?
Sure thing. Yeah, so there's a whole series of different types of models that we think about using for different types of customer touch points, right? So we can think about leveraging behavior around how the customers themselves are interacting with the website, and the most simple form of that is just your most recently viewed products, right? We can develop other types of technologies on top of that to think about how can we leverage how other customers, similar customers to you, are behaving on the website. Or we can start to think about more of the content-based approaches. How can I find visually similar items to things that I've known that you've purchased in the past? Or try to find complementary recommendations. If you've already purchased a bed, how can I recommend you a nightstand or a dresser that's going to pair really well with that item? But what's important to remember is at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is drive business metrics. So what we try to think about is how can we leverage all of the tools at our disposal and all of these different types of recommender models and feed them into one, I would call it almost like a meta model, to think about how can I actually predict customer engagement? How can I predict at this direct point in time, what is the product that you are most likely to convert on or to purchase or to click on? And how can I leverage that information for different customer touch points? And a good example of that is think about the difference between maybe a carousel on the website versus a marketing email that we might send you or a retargeting advertisement. Maybe if you're already on the site and we have some information about you as a customer and the things that you've been interacting with in the past, then we can actually optimize for the types of things that you're going to convert on, to the things that we think you're most likely to purchase today. Versus if you are not currently on site and we're showing you an advertisement either through a third-party vendor or a promotional email that we're sending to you, maybe we actually want to optimize for the things that not only that we think that you'll be interested in, but that would actually drive you back to the website and foster customer engagement. So depending on what touch point we're thinking about, we can try to optimize for a bunch of different metrics across those different various placements.
Wow, that's a lot going on there. And Callie, tell us a little bit about affinity modeling and segmentation and some of your domain.
Yeah, so I think when we think about the types of data we have to help drive recommendations, there's kind of two pretty different spaces. One are customers that we have a lot of information about. They shop with us a lot. We have a good sense of what they might like. And then there's other customers that are maybe new to the site or haven't shopped with us as much. For my team, one of the goals of segmentation is to figure out how to serve different experiences to customers that we maybe don't have a lot of information about, right, when they get to the site. And then for data where we have more information about the customers, deriving what a customer is going to want at sort of a pretty simple level. So what type of product do you want to buy? What styles do you like? What prices do you shop? How much do you care about style? How much do you care about sales? We can make direct recommendations with those, but we can also feed them into a lot of these like meta models to help give them the information so that they can decide what products are right for those customers.
Wow, excellent. So as you are building these models and working in this operating model together, who are the primary stakeholders, and how do you set and manage expectations working with them through that process?
So I think Justin is a big primary stakeholder for us.
Yeah.
But he's not our only stakeholder because I'll let him speak to a little more, but Justin is driving recommendations. Recommendations go all over the site. So we also work with other stakeholders that may own a particular touch point. For example, our homepage, when you get to the site, that has a product owner. So we're coordinating across different teams that are kind of driving different ownership to sort of bring it all together to optimize the experience for the customer and kind of get the core business metrics that we want out of like any particular part of the site. So I think a good example is we work a lot with product, we worked a lot with engineering, we work a lot with analytics, and product might be different teams, right? So recommendations, but also like different touch point owners across Wayfair.
Great.
Yeah, when I think about stakeholders, I kind of think about it, it can be a vague term, and so I think about it in a slightly different way. There's the cross-functional team, which we all work together in order to actually produce things. There's the other people in Wayfair and the other teams that are actually using what we build to incorporate that into core experiences. Things like our storefront team are using our predictions in order to actually manage the sort of the experience on storefront, or our marketing teams who use our recommendations as part of the marketing channel. And then there's the rest of Wayfair as well, because recommendations specifically is such a core function in any e-commerce company that it's, every team here is somewhat interested in what products and what messages we're putting in front of customers at which time. So we have a broader set of stakeholders that might not be directly leveraging our capabilities, but are very interested in what we do because it does affect their success as well. And so like our merchandising teams, our logistics teams, our category management teams.
Yeah, I think it's really important to level set when you're working with primarily a new set of stakeholders or business partners that want to leverage the capabilities that we've been developing, right? So thinking about that, it's really important to define what success looks like for the actual problem that they're trying to solve. Are you trying to foster more customer engagement? Are you trying to improve add to cart rate for a certain set of customers? Are you targeting a specific subset of the customer base that's currently landing on your touch point? And then making sure that they understand what are the capabilities that exist today. Have we tackled problems like this in the past? Is there an off-the-shelf solution that we can adapt to tackle your problem? Or is this net new development, and what does that cycle look like? What's the turnaround time on something like that? What kind of data do we want to ingest and leverage in the models that we're going to be creating? And then even once we have that, how do you define a successful test? And how do we work with analytics partners to define what success looks like there as well?
I think that it's great that you have that framework and approach. Oftentimes I feel like the hardest problem is knowing what problems not to solve, right?
Yeah.
So finding that right problem, that's great. So I'm actually really curious about this. You build a lot of recommendation engines. How do you think about solving for or planning for unintended consequences or bias or things like that in your modeling? Like, how do you introduce serendipity into those recommendations and make sure that you're not, amplifying one signal too much?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that specifically in the space that we're operating in, the type of bias that we're mainly thinking about is more like the diversity of the recommendations that we're generating. We're not leveraging a lot of customer demographic information, so that's not necessarily the type of bias that we need to think all too much about. It's more around what are the recommendations that we're returning, and given the fact that there's almost 14 million, I think, products in the catalog today, how do we make sure we're not just showing the same products over and over again, and that we're showcasing that diversity of the catalog to any customer that comes to site? If we let the recommendation systems that we have in place just take full control of the products, and let's say you're a customer that's in the market for a red area rug, it's going to do a damn good job of showing you a full page of red area rugs. And that's not really the best customer experience because it becomes really overwhelming, it causes choice overload, you don't necessarily know how to decide on which one to buy, especially when they're all a similar price point and all have a ton of really good ratings. So what we try to think about is, can we actually take one abstraction level higher to think about this and say, well, how can we also optimize for the visual diversity of the items on the page, as well as things like the sale flag density or price diversity, so we're really showing you an accurate representation of the things that we have in the catalog. We also have a couple other measures in place to kind of think about making sure that we can showcase some of the items that are not as popular in the catalog. And Callie, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
For strategic.
Yeah.
So we have a framework called Strategic Exposure Framework, which also allows us another opportunity to kind of give exposure to products that recommendations models might not be surfacing kind of for, say you have like a really new product you think is going to do really well. With the cold start problem, it can be really challenging to kind of give that a kickstart. So I think that's a good example. I'd also add that kind of practically, a lot of what this looks like are things, we A/B test everything, right? So we have a good read on whether or not something is successful, which doesn't get directly at the bias issue, but it does help us to understand what the overall impact of the changes that we're making are. And I'd also add, since Dario isn't with us today, that our analytics teams are amazing at helping us with quality assessment. So they've built a lot of tools to help us understand what the new sorts look like and what things like diversity, whether it's with price or ratings or sale, actually will look like when we change the model.
Great, awesome. I'm thinking red area rugs and all these like Big Lebowski jokes are running through my head right now. So let's talk a little bit about, actually I had one other question. You mentioned, let me make sure I get this right, this single threaded ownership, is that the right nomenclature? Okay, yep. So you have these different kind of groups and areas, and there are other data scientists, peers of yours, working on other types of problems. I assume that you're oftentimes solving the same problems, engineering the same features, doing a lot of the same work. What sort of frameworks or mechanisms are you starting to install to kind of reuse and share that intellectual property that you're developing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the data science and engineering functions at Wayfair grow, you can imagine there are a lot of things that teams want to use that should be reusable, and it makes a lot of sense to be reused. So for example, maybe it makes a lot of sense for a bunch of different use cases to leverage the past 7 days of a customer's click stream or the actual products that they've clicked on in the past week. There's an engineering function called machine learning platforms that's starting to think about how can we actually create a centralized feature library for data scientists and engineers to be able to use. So there's one common definition, there's one source of truth for actually pulling that information, and that kind of really expedites the process of exploratory data analysis for data scientists or analysts that are looking at using that information, as well as providing documentation to think about, okay, where is this data coming from? How long does it actually live in those locations for? And how can I actually leverage it or access it today? So that's just kind of one example of how we're doing that. You can also think about not even just doing that for features, but extracting it away to entire models. There might be applications where you want to actually leverage a model that was created by a different team as an input to some of the things that you're doing. And that's kind of very similar to the function of how Callie's team and my team work together. It might be really useful for us to understand what are the types of products that you're actually in market for. Have you been interacting with dressers and beds a lot, or have you been interacting a lot with more like living room furniture? And that can really help tailor the experience for personalized recommendations. So we can have an entirely separate model that's trying to predict what are the types or categories of products that you're actually likely to engage with. And that can be an entirely separate team that's thinking about those types of use cases. And then we can think about a much more granular problem, which is once you kind of identify this overarching category that we think you're likely to engage with or likely to convert on, how can we think about surfacing the right products from within the catalog to generate you the right product recommendations? So you can think about kind of the reuse component as both like feature specific and entire models that can be leveraged by other teams.
That's awesome. I think that's like a future state vision a lot of organizations are marching towards, especially as I think this data science scalability problem is one that's still new to a lot of us. We're all wrestling with. So I'm excited to keep in touch and learn how things are going as that evolves. Before I move on, any questions from the audience? Any burning questions, things you're thinking about? I'm happy to run around the room with Mike. All right.
Yeah, I was just wondering, it was really helpful to hear just your thoughts on the whole process. And then I was wondering, how do you, or how have you evolved your thinking on the differences between, say, data science and analytics, and even product to that extent? So we're wondering, how do you define those things, and how's that evolved over time?
Well, I'll give my thoughts about this, and they've heard this analogy before as well. I've been really focusing on us building sort of a cross-functional team that involves data scientists, product management, engineering, and analytics. And as I like try to keep emphasizing to the team, the type of team that I want us to be isn't so much a football team where everyone's got their fixed position and rigid role, but more like a basketball team where everyone's got their specialty, but they move around the court a lot in order to score. And as I think hopefully they'll attest to as well, I think we do see those sort of fluid boundaries, although there are still cores of responsibility amongst our team. So let's just talk about analytics and data scientists, right? There is a lot of overlap there in, for example, who's doing exploratory data analysis or diving into the data, although there is still core competencies as well, and who's actually building the machine learning algorithmic models versus a lot of the sort of trying to develop the appropriate metrics for monitoring operational health. You also see that sort of fluid boundary with engineering as well, and that you do have both machine learning data scientists who are doing some of the data pipelining themselves and data engineering themselves, but there's also engineers who are diving in and trying to understand the model code as they try and productionize it. And I think the places where we've been most successful is, again, where those boundaries are very fluid, but yet there is still clear competency, and we are kind of trying to work as a team. So, sort of address your...
Get another question over here.
In terms of the data science that you're applying to any aspect of maximizing the revenue from your customers, can you give us a sense of the kind of, specifically some of the parameters that you're looking at? So a customer comes to the site, your job is to maximize their sales. How do you do it?
There's a bunch of different pieces that kind of factor into that, right? So like I mentioned, we try to think about this from kind of a two-stage problem, right? So one is the Wayfair catalog is enormous, and there's literally millions of potential options that I could present to you, the customer. So how do I narrow down that search space so it actually becomes something, somewhat of a feasible problem for me to rank those products in real time based on your real-time browsing history? So that's kind of where we leverage models that look at things like visual similarity to the things that you've been interacting with, or looking at what other similar types of customers have engaged with in the past when we actually have some information about you. If you're a brand new customer and have never been to the website before, we leverage reinforcement learning techniques on site right now to kind of think about what are the optimal subsets of products to show to different segments of customer. And that can be based off of like the different locations that someone's in. Obviously in January, a customer in Miami is going to be buying something a little bit different than a customer in Alaska. So you want to start thinking about those different location preferences to how that kind of factors into play. But once you've actually leveraged models to kind of prune down that search base, we actually go and train models based on millions of historical page loads of customer behavior to say, hey, look, given this customer's browse context or their browse history at this period of time, can we actually predict, like use like a binary classification algorithm to think about what will the customer actually buy this product or not based on historical past behavior? And can we actually extend that and apply that to future domains and actual future page loads and think about how that actually predicts customer engagement? Does that kind of answer your question?
It scratches the surface.
I think he was looking for some of the secret sauce.
Happy to chat a little bit more in depth offline too.
Yeah, the short answer is any way we can, right? Is how we try and drive customer engagement and experience. And that's by trying to leverage all the data we can, trying to use all of the state-of-the-art algorithms we can, and also thinking through what we actually are trying to optimize for, right? It's not necessarily maximizing revenue or profit. It's you try and think through what you can do in order to drive the lifetime value of the customer, but we are very focused here in trying to drive value for the customer. So thinking through what is a really good recommendation for a customer, for example, and what are the proxies for that?
Yeah, I just take it like we all focus on the recommendations aspect of it, but we're not the only teams that are optimizing things to kind of improve the customer experience. But when you dig in on how we actually do it, I think something really important to bring up is how we think about risk and how we think about quick iterations. A lot of our teams kind of really balance quick incremental small wins with a longer term vision on like what's this big problem and how am I going to get to that end state of what's optimal. And I think that really helps us kind of tackle how do we improve the experience in a way that means we're continuously gaining ground with like a big target at the end.
Yeah, I think that's critically important too, especially when you start thinking about that there's lead time associated with developing a new capability or developing a new model, working with a new data set that you have not explored in the past. So in the amount of time that it actually takes for you to go develop that, to tune hyperparameters, to do offline evaluation, to make sure you're putting your best foot forward when you actually deploy this model, can you actually identify a subset of maybe business rules or different logic that you can apply in the meantime to kind of get some win out in the short term while you spend time developing the longer term solution?
Thank you. I guess continuing on the secret sauce topic, if you can speak briefly about what tools you guys are using for machine learning, algorithm exploration, as well as seeing through all of the models all the way to production. And the databases.
Passwords.
Sure. I can go. All right, sure. You guys are really digging in here. No, absolutely. So if you want to talk a little bit more about specifics, like we are totally bought in on leveraging deep learning for predicting customer behavior. So leveraging tools like Keras and TensorFlow are part of like really the core of what we're thinking about. And so in terms of actually the day-to-day kind of tools that data scientists and engineers are using, obviously scikit-learn, we're really invested in integrated with the Hadoop HDFS ecosystem for actually data storage and trying to think about how do we actually leverage that in a real-time environment as well as for logging purposes. I think that one of the things that's been really instrumental for us is kind of this whole shift in the entire paradigm shift in thinking towards can you actually promote customer engagement with these deep learning technologies. In the past, we had leveraged standard tools for recommendations like collaborative filtering, and then those had been successful in the past. But once you start developing an entire suite of models, it starts to become kind of inherently unclear of which type of customer do you want to use this for, and how many recommendations should I be calling from each model and stitching them together to create an experience for a customer. And so the thought process that we had, and that's been pretty widely adopted in the community, is to kind of move towards this more two-stage paradigm shift, where you're leveraging the collaborative filtering models and the content-based approaches to think about what are the types of products that are generally relevant, and then can I leverage these deep learning models that sit on the back of TensorFlow and Keras to actually predict, is this something that the customer is going to buy, or how can I actually rank these products effectively?
Yeah, and I'll just add that we also have some in-house things being built for us by our machine learning platforms team, which also helps us to, as a broader data science team, what are the solutions that we need to have in place to kind of get us to the end state that we're shooting for.
And that's a general trend here at Wayfair. We build a lot of our own proprietary tech, especially where we think it's going to help us compete. So that's going to be a lot, not only the tooling and logging and processing pipelines and things like that, but also our real-time evaluation and other operational platforms.
One more question from the audience here.
Yes, so I have a question about model quality management. So my sense is that you need to make a lot of recommendation on a day-to-day basis and so many products, right? So how do you manage, what model you think is good to ship out and what is less revisit? And follow up on that is how frequent, right, you revisit the model that already in production. Is it an online continual training, or is that some kind of threshold to revisit?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and it's a really hard one to answer. I think if you think about the question itself, like what is a good recommendation and how do you do that evaluation? Quantitatively, it's a difficult one to answer. You can look at a set of recommendations and say whether it looks good or bad. But if you were doing this qualitatively, it's possible for you to get two models side by side and say they both look good. I don't know which one looks better. And so we rely on a lot of different information retrieval techniques, like normalized discounted cumulative gain, recall precision, to start thinking about the actual accuracies of our models. But even that doesn't tell the entire picture, because when you're actually evaluating these systems, you're biased towards the sorts that you're showing on site today. So necessarily, if you're showing products that are not currently being shown at the top of sorts, then in an offline evaluation, it's going to perform worse all the time. Now, what we can do to think about getting around that is understanding what are the different guardrails, what we call them, or different metrics that are associated with model performance. And you can think about a really clear one is if I have a model that's generating really great looking recommendations, but all of the products it's showing are 8 times more expensive than what's being shown on site today, then you can probably expect that's not going to perform too well on site. So we can look at that and say, okay, for the given sorts that are being generated, how do we actually think about what are the prices of these products? Is the visual diversity any different than the current control approach? Is there more fast shipping products that are being shown at the top of the sorts? How do you think about that aspect? And in terms of making sure that you can kind of adapt to different changes in customer behavior, it's critically important to think about making sure you're retraining these models at a regular cadence. Now, what that cadence should be can vary by use case, it can vary by customer type, and it can vary by model. But typically, we like to make sure that all the models that we're actually productionizing and putting out as control logic are actually being retrained at a regular cadence to pick up on changes in customer preference over time.
And just to add to that, this is like one of the core focuses of our analytics team as well, in order to actually try and monitor the operational health of all the recommendations we have across all of our different touch points. Because even if you are testing online, and even if you are training routinely, you can still see drift as your customer base changes, as your product catalog changes, the techniques that used to do better might not be doing as well, or some of the other changes that you've rolled out across your experience or your site might adversely affect things, right? So it's something that we're always paranoid about and always thinking about how best to measure over time. That's doing a lot of holdout tests, longitudinal tests, A/B tests, developing custom metrics in order to measure various dimensions of the health of our sorts in our business, and trying to get ahead of problems like model drift.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we're creeping up on our time here, so I want to finish with one kind of rapid fire game. You want to play a game?
Let's do it.
We didn't do this before, so this is risky. Game's called Start, Stop, Continue. We've talked a lot about what works really well and what you love about things here at Wayfair and the operating model around data science, but what would you stop doing if you could change anything? You have amnesty too. You can't be.
I'm not going to go first.
What would you start doing?
It's hard. Like, what would you change about what you do every day?
Yeah.
So I'll maybe share something that I can do better and give everyone else some time to think. So whenever we launch a new test, we try really get feedback from a test. We're obviously trying to learn from it. And something I think we can do better as an organization is to better share the learnings from our own tests across, because I think that's something that sometimes gets missed. Is this is why it didn't go as great as it could have. Here's the solution we implemented to fix that, and getting like those pieces of how we resolve this challenge in a like more centralized place that's easier for people to access and sort of sort through is something like I'd really like to start doing. I think it's really hard because it's often this is the specific challenge that we had in our specific circumstance, and how do you generalize that for someone else to be able to consume it in a good way that doesn't also cost you a lot in terms of time. But that's something I would like to try to start doing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'd like to start doing is, if you think about the problems that we're trying to solve, these systems are running in real time, and it's critically important to make sure that they're very efficient and can operate in that real-time environment. And we do a fairly good job of collaborating across teams, but something that I'd like to start doing is bringing engineers into the process of modeling incredibly early on, as early as like the data exploration phases, to make sure that the data sets that we're trying to work with are actually going to be available in real time, are updating in real time, and we're starting to think about the scalability concerns as soon as the early model development and the initial proof of concepts are being developed. That's something that we typically start to think about midway through that process right now, and I think we do a good job partnering with engineering teams to make sure that we're not imposing latency on customers when we're actually deploying these models, but bringing those types of thoughts and those types of questions even earlier into the process, I only think would help expedite that even further.
All right, so for me, I got all three. All right, so stop handoffs. I hate that word. It's a handoff. It indicates it's a waterfall. It's a problem of collaboration. That's an indication that things are a problem. We've started to stop that, but there's still places where it occurs, so let's stop that. There's so many things that we have opportunities that we should be starting doing. There's the organizational side. I'd like to start using more data that we have. Right? We still use a lot of the customer data, but there's just a lot of data across Wayfair that we still want to get access to and start using more aggressively. And then continue. I almost embarrass saying it because it's kind of a cop-out, but it's true. It's like you got to continue to obsess about the customer. I think the power of recommendations is really about trust. Some of our competitors, when I go onto their sites, I won't name Amazon, but when we go to their sites, I have trouble really trusting any of the recommendations they put in front of me because I know it's probably a bunch of high-margin crap that they just want to buy, and you see all the articles in there. And once you actually start thinking about that, you just spend more time trying to find actually what you want, searching, and anything you put up for any of the recommendations have lost all their value, right? So that's one thing that I'm really concerned about, and want us to continue really obsessing about the customer and what it is to have trusted recommendations for them.
That was a really great point. So I'm going to end it on that note. And I want to thank Domino Data Lab for having us all up here today. I want to thank our friends at Wayfair for joining us and sharing all these insights. I'm sure you're going to hang out for a little bit.
It'll be around.
All right. So I'm sure I'll get a chance to ask them a few more questions if you want. And have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.